The following production is presented by League InfoSite and the Credit Union Broadcast Experience, CUBE-TV.
Thank you for joining me at the CU Compliance Connection on CUBE-TV, brought to you by InfoSite. I'm Sean Wolbert. The National Credit Union Administration, or the NCUA, passed a final rule that permits credit unions to engage in limited derivative activities for the purpose of mitigating interest rate risk. This rule applies only to federal credit unions. The final rule addresses permissible derivatives and characteristics, limits on derivatives, operational requirements, counterparty and margining requirements, and the procedures a credit union must follow to apply for derivatives authority. The first and primary requirement that a credit union must address is that this authority is limited and has been granted exclusively for the purpose of reducing interest rate risk exposure. There are several definitions that are an important part of the rule. Of primary concern are: a derivative is a financial contract which derives its value from the value and performance of some other underlying financial instrument or variable, such as an index or an interest rate. Fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date as defined by GAAP. Forward sales commitment is an agreement to sell an asset at a price and future date specified in the agreement. Interest rate lock commitment means an agreement by a credit union to hold a certain interest rate and points for a specified amount of time while a prospective borrower's application is being processed. To invest in derivatives, the credit union must apply for, receive, and maintain authority from the NCUA for derivative investments. The requirements include the NCUA assigned composite camel code rating must be 1, 2, or 3 for the credit union, with a management component of 1 or 2. And the assets of that credit union must be at least $250 million as of the most recent call report. If the credit union no longer meets the NCUA's requirements or fails to comply with the investment requirements, it must immediately stop entering into any new derivative transaction until it becomes in compliance with the requirements. Within 3 business days from the regulatory violation, it must provide the appropriate NCUA field director notification of the regulatory violation, which will include a description of the violation and the immediate corrective action that the credit union is taking. And within 15 business days after notifying the appropriate field director, submit a written corrective action plan to that field director. Once the credit union has been granted authority, it may enter into derivative transactions that are limited to derivatives permitted under Part 703, Investment and Deposit Activities, embedded options not required under Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, or GAAP, adopted in the United States to be accounted for separately from the host contract, and interest rate lock commitments or forward sales commitments made in connection with a loan originated by a federal credit union. The credit union must adhere to any limitations imposed by the NCUA for investment in derivatives. This begins with entry limit authority. The aggregate fair value loss on all of the credit union's derivative positions cannot exceed 15% of net worth, and the credit union's weighted average remaining maturity notional cannot exceed 65% of net worth. Or, after the credit union receives experience with derivatives transactions, they get an increased standard limit authority in which the aggregate fair value loss on all of the credit union's derivatives position cannot exceed 25% of net worth, and the weighted average remaining maturity notional of the 100% of net worth. So the credit union moves from, an entry-level trial period with the NCUA to the standard limits of authority, which are more broad for the credit union. The credit union cannot engage in the standard limit authority until it is engaged in derivatives at the entry limit authority for a continuous period of 1 year, beginning on the trade date of its first derivatives transaction, and has not been notified in writing by the NCUA of any relevant safety and soundness concerns while engaging in derivatives at the entry-level authority. To attain and retain the authority to invest in derivatives, the credit union must ensure that the following employee and volunteer experience and competencies are met. Before entering into any derivatives transaction and annually thereafter, the credit union's board members must receive training that provides a general understanding of derivatives and the knowledge required to provide strategic oversight of the credit union's derivatives program. This must include providing board members with an understanding of how derivatives fit into the credit union's business model and risk management processes. The credit union's senior executive officers must be able to understand, approve, and provide oversight for the derivatives activities. These individuals must have a comprehensive understanding of how derivatives fit into the credit union's business model and risk management processes. Credit union staff who work with or in conjunction with derivatives must have experience in asset liability management, proper accounting and financial reporting, derivatives execution and oversight, and the ability to evaluate counterparty collateral and margining risk as required by the regulation. The credit union is also required to maintain internal control structures to protect the credit union's assets. And these include, before executing any derivatives transaction, the credit union must identify and document the circumstances that lead to the decision to hedge, specify the derivative strategy the credit union will employ, and demonstrate the economic effectiveness of this hedge. The credit union must have an internal control review that is focused on the integration and introduction of the derivatives functions for the first 2 years after commencing its derivatives program. The review should be performed by an independent external unit, or if applicable, the credit union's internal auditor. The credit union must obtain an annual financial statement audit and be compliant with GAAP for all derivatives-related accounting and reporting. The credit union must maintain a written and schematic description of the derivatives management process in its derivatives procedures. The credit union must have appropriate separation of duties for asset, liability, and risk management, accounting and financial reporting, derivatives execution and oversight, and collateral, counterparty, and margining management. The credit union must hire legal counsel to reasonably ensure that all derivatives contracts adequately protect the legal and business interests of the credit union. And the credit union must have a comprehensive written policy and procedure for control, measurement, and management of all derivatives transactions. If the credit union uses external service providers to support or conduct aspects of its derivatives program, the third-party provider cannot act as a counterparty to the credit union's derivatives transaction, act as a principal or agent in the credit union's derivatives transactions, or have discretionary authority to execute any of the credit union's derivatives transaction. The credit union must confirm that that third party has the internal capacity, experience, and skills to oversee and manage external service providers that it uses. The credit union also must document the specific uses of third-party service providers in its process and responsibility framework, and must perform asset liability risk management and liquidity risk management functions internally and independently from that third-party service provider. The third-party service provider can provide assistance and input, but cannot conduct the functions for the credit union. The credit union must also follow all NCUA reporting requirements, which are broad when it comes to doing derivatives investment. The credit union must identify any areas of noncompliance with any provision of the credit union's authority, NCUA regulations, or the credit union's own internal policies. It must utilize the limits in effect based on the regulatory requirements, itemize the credit union's individual positions and aggregate current and fair values, and compare them with the credit union's fair value loss and notional limit authority. Provide a comprehensive view of the credit union's statement of financial condition, including, but not limited to, net economic value calculations for the credit union's statement of financial condition done with derivatives included and excluded. Evaluate the effectiveness of the derivatives transactions in mitigating risk and rate risk, and evaluating the effectiveness of the hedge relationship and reporting for derivatives in compliance with GAAP. On a monthly basis, a comprehensive derivatives report must be delivered to the senior executive officers, and if applicable, the credit union's Asset Liability Committee. And at least quarterly, the credit union's senior executive officers must deliver a comprehensive derivatives report to the Board of Directors. It is important, if you are considering investing in derivatives, to carefully review the requirements and ensure that competent and experienced staff are involved in the process to ensure credit union's assets are properly protected. Thank you for joining me at the CU Compliance Connection by InfoSight, only on Cube TV.
Thanks for watching the #1 compliance program for the credit union community. Stay tuned.